I still remember the day we moved into Blue Ridge Lane like it was yesterday. It was late spring, and the air smelled so fresh, like cut grass mixed with blooming flowers. The house we bought wasn't huge or fancy, but it felt perfect for us. A cozy little colonial-style home with white shutters, a small front yard, and just enough space for Ryan and me to start our new chapter together. We'd saved for years to make this happen, and as I stood on the porch watching Ryan carry boxes inside, I couldn't help but feel proud of how far we'd come. But that feeling didn't last long. Within an hour of unpacking, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman standing there. She looked polished, I guess you could say. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her dress looked like it belonged in a magazine, and she carried herself like she owned the place. "Hello," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to Blue Ridge Lane. I'm Evelyn Harper, president of the Homeowners Association." She handed me a thick binder with gold lettering on the cover. HOA Guidelines and Regulations *. My heart sank a little as I took it from her. "We're so glad you're here," she added, though her tone made it sound more like a warning than a welcome. That night, after all the moving chaos had settled down, I flipped through the binder. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough. Rules about keeping lawns tidy, parking cars in driveways instead of streets, that kind of thing. But the deeper I went, the more ridiculous it got. No wind chimes. Seriously, no clotheslines visible from the road. Even the color of our front door needed approval if we ever wanted to repaint it. Ryan noticed my growing frustration and tried to reassure me. "It's not that bad," he said, leaning over my shoulder. "These rules are probably just to keep things looking nice." Nice. I shot back, holding up the binder. "This isn't about being nice. It's about control. Who cares what color my front door is?" He chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Look, let's just follow the rules for now. We don't want to rock the boat right away." Rock the boat. That phrase stuck with me. Was that really what living here would be like? Walking on eggshells, afraid of breaking some invisible rule. I glanced out the window at Evelyn's house across the street. Her lawn was immaculate, her flower beds perfectly symmetrical. Everything about her screamed order and perfection, and something about that perfection made me uneasy. The next morning, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. Most of the houses looked similar, clean, well-maintained, almost too perfect. As I passed Evelyn's driveway, I saw her standing outside, clipboard in hand, jotting notes while surveying the area. She glanced up briefly, gave me a curt nod, and went back to whatever she was doing. It was strange, like she was inspecting everyone. But why? By the time I returned home, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe Evelyn was just overly enthusiastic about her role in the HOA. Maybe these rules weren't such a big deal after all. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The first few months on Blue Ridge Lane were peaceful, at least on the surface. Ryan and I settled into a routine, planting flowers in the garden, hosting weekend barbecues, and getting to know our neighbors. Well, most of them. Evelyn kept her distance, always watching from afar with that clipboard glued to her side. She'd nod politely when we crossed paths, but there was something about her presence that felt off, like she was waiting for us to slip up. Then came the yellow envelope. It appeared one Saturday morning, taped neatly to our front door. The bright color caught my eye immediately, and my stomach tightened as I peeled it off. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA titled *Violation Notice*. Apparently, the cheerful wind chime I'd hung by the back patio, a gift from my mom, was considered an unauthorized decorative item. The letter instructed me to remove it within 7 days or face fines. I stared at the paper, dumbfounded. A wind chime? Really? Out of all the things they could worry about, this was their priority. I crumpled the letter in frustration and tossed it onto the kitchen counter. Ryan walked in just then, holding a cup of coffee. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing my expression. "They're mad about the wind chime," I said, gesturing toward the crumpled note. "Can you believe this?" He sighed, setting his mug down. "Just take it down. It's not worth fighting over." Reluctantly, I agreed. That evening, I marched outside, unhooked the wind chime, and threw it into the trash bin. Problem solved. Or so I thought. But the letters kept coming. Each week brought a new violation notice, each one more absurd than the last. The potted plants near the driveway, too close to the curb. The mailbox flag, not aligned properly. Even the curtains in our living room window were deemed non-compliant because they didn't match the neutral aesthetic requirement. Every time I opened the mailbox, my heart sank a little more. At first, I tried to laugh it off. They must have nothing better to do, I joked to Ryan one night, waving yet another letter in the air. But the joke stopped when the fines started rolling in. Small amounts at first, $25 here, $50 there, but enough to add up quickly. And then came the inspections. Evelyn would show up unannounced, clipboard in hand, circling our house like a hawk searching for prey. She'd jot notes, snap photos, and leave without saying a word. One day, while watering the garden, I spotted her peeking over the fence. I straightened up, gripping the hose tightly. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned, flashing that same rehearsed smile. "Just making sure everything is up to code," she replied sweetly. "Wouldn't want any more violations, would we?" Her words stung, but I forced myself to nod. "Of course not," I muttered before turning away. As I watched her walk back to her car, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing control, not just of my home, but of my life. These rules weren't about keeping the neighborhood nice anymore. They felt personal, like Evelyn had singled us out for some reason. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of violation notices. Ryan placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Maybe we should talk to someone," he suggested gently. "Greg across the street seems to know a lot about these kinds of things." I nodded slowly, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe Greg could help me make sense of this mess. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end anytime soon. Something bigger was brewing, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. It all came to a head one crisp Thursday morning. I was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when I heard a sharp knock on the door. Evelyn stood there, her usual clipboard tucked under her arm, but this time her expression was colder than ever. "There's going to be a meeting tomorrow night," she announced without preamble. "You're required to attend." "Required," I repeated, my voice catching in my throat. "What's this about?" She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by my confusion. "The board has concerns about your compliance with community standards," she said smoothly. Then, without waiting for me to respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. That evening, I couldn't focus on anything. The thought of facing the entire neighborhood, and Evelyn, made my stomach churn. Ryan tried to reassure me. "Just go, listen to what they have to say, and figure out how to fix it," he said calmly. But his words didn't ease my anxiety. This wasn't just about fixing a problem. It felt like I was being put on trial. The next night, we walked into the community center together. It was a small, sterile room with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Rows of folding chairs were set up facing a long table where Evelyn and the other HOA members sat, looking far too serious for what should have been a simple neighborhood discussion. As we entered, every head turned to stare. Whispers filled the air, and I suddenly felt like an outsider in my own home. Evelyn began the meeting with a rehearsed speech about maintaining property values and upholding community standards. Then she launched into a detailed list of our so-called violations. Each point felt like a punch to the gut. The wind chime, the plants, the curtains, it was all laid out for everyone to hear. Her tone was clinical, almost robotic, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she spoke. Other neighbors chimed in. some defending Evelyn's stance, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One man leaned forward and said, "We need to think about how these kinds of things affect property values." Another woman nodded along, adding, "Maybe they don't understand how important it is to keep everything uniform." Uniform. The word echoed in my mind. Was that really what mattered most here? Not comfort or individuality, but saneness. I wanted to stand up and shout, to tell them how ridiculous this whole thing was. But instead, I sat silently, gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. Ryan reached over and placed a hand on my knee, his touch grounding me. Still, I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. When the meeting finally ended, people avoided eye contact as we left. Someone muttered loud enough for us to hear, "Maybe they don't belong here." Those words haunted me long after we got home. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Who were these people to decide whether we belonged? We worked hard for this house, for this life. And yet it felt like no matter what we did, it would never be enough. As dawn crept through the windows, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. Determined to fight back, to show them that we weren't going anywhere. Whatever it took, I was ready. After the meeting, I felt like a shadow of myself. The weight of those judgmental stares and whispered comments followed me everywhere. Some neighbors avoided me altogether, while others gave me sympathetic smiles that only made me feel worse. It was clear the HOA had painted us as troublemakers, and no one dared to challenge Evelyn's authority. Not openly, anyway. But then, something unexpected happened. Sarah, the young mom 2 doors down, knocked on our door one afternoon. She held a plate of cookies in her hands and wore an apologetic smile. "I just wanted to say, don't let them get to you," she said softly. "They can be impossible sometimes." Her kindness caught me off guard. For weeks, I'd felt so isolated, like I was fighting this battle alone. But Sarah's visit reminded me that not everyone in the neighborhood was against us. As we sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, she opened up about her own struggles with the HOA. "When we first moved here, they gave me grief over the color of my shutters," she admitted. "It's exhausting." Her stories made me realize I wasn't the only one who'd been targeted. And when she mentioned Greg, the retired lawyer across the street, my ears perked up. "He knows the HOA rules inside and out," Sarah said. "If anyone can help you navigate this mess, it's him." The next day, I worked up the courage to knock on Greg's door. He greeted me warmly, inviting me inside without hesitation. His living room was cluttered with books and papers, but there was a sharp intelligence in his eyes as he listened to my story. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and nodded thoughtfully. "Evelyn thrives on fear," he said. "She counts on people being too intimidated to push back. But if you stand your ground, you'll throw her off balance." Encouraged by his words, I started digging deeper into the HOA guidelines. I read every line of the rulebook, searching for loopholes or inconsistencies. Greg helped me draft polite but firm responses to their violation notices, pointing out where the HOA was overstepping its bounds. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of control returning. Meanwhile, tensions simmered beneath the surface of Blue Ridge Lane. Neighbors took sides, dividing the once close-knit community. Some supported Evelyn, clinging to her vision of perfection, while others quietly sympathized with us. One evening, as Ryan and I walked our dog, we passed a group of neighbors chatting near the park. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw us, and I couldn't help but notice the way they exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn, however, remained as calculating as ever. She continued her inspections, her clipboard always in hand, her gaze lingering just a little too long on our house. Each time I spotted her, I felt a surge of defiance. She might have the power of the HOA behind her, but I was done letting her intimidate me. One rainy afternoon, as I stood by the window watching water pool in the gutters, an idea began to form in my mind. If Evelyn wanted to play games, fine. But this time, I'd set the rules. It started with a knock on the door one dreary Tuesday morning. Evelyn stood there, her usual clipboard tucked under her arm, but this time she wasn't alone. Two men in hard hats accompanied her, holding blueprints and measuring tools. Her smile was tight, almost smug, as she announced, "Good news. The HOA has approved plans to install a water filtration plant on your property." My jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" She gestured vaguely toward the wooded area at the back of our yard. "Your land has plenty of space and plenty of natural resources to give. It's only fair that you contribute to the community's needs." "Fair," I echoed, my voice rising. "You can't just build something on my property without asking." "Oh, but we did ask," she replied smoothly, pulling out a document covered in fine print. She tapped a specific clause. "This provision in the HOA agreement grants us access to undeveloped portions of any homeowner's lot for community benefit. You signed it when you bought the house." I took the paper from her, my hands trembling as I scanned the dense legalese. Sure enough, buried deep in the contract, was the clause she referenced. My stomach churned. How had I missed this? Ryan and I had skimmed through the documents during closing, trusting the real estate agent to flag anything unusual. Now it felt like a trap, a loophole Evelyn had been waiting to exploit. Before I could argue further, Evelyn breezed past me into the house, her entourage close behind. They began pacing around the backyard, marking stakes in the ground and muttering measurements under their breath. By the time they left, the edge of the woods was dotted with bright orange flags, each one a reminder that my property was no longer truly mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain pattered against the windows as I stared at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in my mind. Anger bubbled inside me, hotter than ever before. If Evelyn thought she could walk all over us, she was wrong. Dead wrong. The next morning, I called Greg. He listened intently as I explained what had happened, his brow furrowing. "She's playing dirty," he said finally. "But there's always a way to fight back." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward. Greg leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. "If they want to use your land for water, why not turn the tables? Let's make sure they get more water than they bargained for." By the time I left Greg's house, a plan had begun to take shape. Over the next few days, Sarah's husband helped me reroute drainage pipes and create makeshift dams using tarps and sandbags. We dug channels leading directly toward the low-lying areas where most of the HOA board members lived, including Evelyn's pristine mansion. As the work progressed, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For once, I wasn't the victim. I was taking control. When everything was ready, I waited for the perfect storm. And then it came. A torrential downpour that lasted for 3 days straight. From my bedroom window, I watched as chaos unfolded below. Evelyn's basement flooded first, water spilling into her garage. Then came the homes of other board members, their manicured lawns turning into muddy swamps. Cars stalled in driveways, furniture floated in living rooms, and panicked neighbors scrambled to salvage what they could. Meanwhile, my own property remained dry, thanks to the elevated design I'd implemented years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their greed had backfired spectacularly. When the rain finally stopped and the clouds cleared, Blue Ridge Lane looked like a disaster zone. Waterlogged lawns stretched across the neighborhood, debris floated in driveways, and the air smelled of damp earth and mildew. The HOA board members' homes had taken the brunt of the flooding, with Evelyn's mansion at the center of the chaos. Her prized flower beds were ruined, her garage filled with murky water, and her once immaculate driveway now resembled a swamp. Insurance adjusters swarmed the area, clipboard-wielding men and women assessing the damage while homeowners exchanged frantic whispers. Some neighbors openly blamed faulty drainage systems or poor city planning, but others weren't so quick to jump to conclusions. Whispers began to spread. How strange it was that only certain houses were affected. Why hadn't my property flooded? Why did the water seem to flow directly toward Evelyn and her allies? Greg was the first to approach me about it. He showed up one evening as I was sweeping mud off my porch, a sly grin on his face. "Word's getting around," he said casually, leaning against the railing. "People are starting to connect the dots." I froze, gripping the broom tightly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, clearly amused. "Let's just say your little project didn't go unnoticed. Folks are wondering how such perfect properties ended up underwater while yours stayed dry." "Good," I muttered under my breath, though my heart raced. If they wanted to play games, they'd learn what happened when someone messed with my home. To my surprise, no one confronted me directly. Instead, attitudes began to shift. Neighbors who had once avoided me now greeted me warmly. Others quietly thanked me for standing up to the HOA, admitting they'd been too afraid to challenge Evelyn themselves. Even Sarah joked one afternoon, "Guess we know who really runs this lane now." Evelyn, however, wasn't laughing. She tried to pin the blame on outdated infrastructure, insisting the city needed to fix its pipes. But her excuses rang hollow. People weren't buying it, not when the flooding seemed so conveniently targeted. Rumors swirled that she might step down as HOA president, but she denied them fiercely, clinging to her crumbling authority. One day, as I watered the flowers in my front yard, I spotted Evelyn walking briskly down the street, her heels sinking slightly into the still soft ground. She glanced at me briefly, her usual confidence replaced by thinly veiled resentment. For the first time, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. All those months of frustration, all the nights spent lying awake worrying, it had led to this moment. Evelyn wasn't untouchable anymore. As the days passed, life on Blue Ridge Lane began to settle into a new rhythm. The power dynamic had shifted, and people were more cautious about enforcing petty rules. A few neighbors even suggested revising the HOA guidelines, toning down some of the stricter regulations. It was small progress, but it mattered. Late one evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ryan joined me with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've changed things around here," he said, handing me a glass. I smiled faintly, taking a sip. "Not everything," I replied, "but maybe enough." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant chirp of crickets. For the first time since moving in, I felt truly at peace. The battle wasn't over, not entirely, but for now, I could breathe easy. And that was enough. Life on Blue Ridge Lane slowly returned to normal, or at least, a new kind of normal. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind muddy patches and soggy lawns that would take weeks to recover. But the real change wasn't in the landscape, it was in the atmosphere. Tensions lingered, but they were quieter now, simmering beneath the surface instead of boiling over. People seemed more cautious, less eager to enforce the HOA's strict rules. And Evelyn, she was nowhere to be seen. Rumors spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some said Evelyn had resigned as HOA president out of embarrassment. Others whispered she'd moved away entirely, unable to face the fallout from the flooding fiasco. Whatever the truth, her absence was palpable. The clipboard-wielding queen who once ruled Blue Ridge Lane with an iron fist had vanished, leaving a void no one seemed eager to fill. In her place, a neighbor named Tom, a quiet man who had always kept to himself, stepped up as interim HOA president. Unlike Evelyn, Tom didn't come across as controlling or judgmental. At his first meeting, he opened by apologizing for past grievances and promising a fresh start. "We're here to support each other," he said earnestly, "not police every little detail." The room erupted in murmurs of approval, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Maybe this neighborhood could finally become the community I'd hoped for when we moved in. As the weeks went by, subtle changes began to take root. Fences that had been painted only in approved colors now sported cheerful blues and yellows. Wind chimes tinkled gently in backyards, and clotheslines reappeared in side yards where they hadn't dared hang before. It wasn't rebellion, it was freedom, slowly reclaiming its place on Blue Ridge Lane. One crisp autumn afternoon, I stood on my porch, sipping hot tea and watching leaves swirl in the breeze. Sarah walked by pushing her toddler in a stroller, waving cheerfully as she passed. Across the street, Greg sat on his porch reading a book, occasionally glancing up to nod hello. For the first time since moving here, I felt like I belonged. Not because I'd conformed to someone else's standards, but because I'd fought for the right to be myself. Ryan joined me outside, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he asked softly. I nodded, leaning into him. "It does. Like we can actually breathe now." But even as I basked in the newfound peace, I knew this chapter of our lives would stay with me forever. The battle with Evelyn had taught me something valuable. Standing up for yourself isn't about winning. It's about proving you won't be pushed around. Sometimes it means turning the tables. Other times it means simply refusing to back down. Either way, it takes courage and a willingness to fight for what's yours. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, I reflected on everything we'd been through. The violations, the meetings, the flooding. It all felt surreal now, like a storm that had passed and left us stronger in its wake. Blue Ridge Lane wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But maybe that was okay. Maybe imperfection was exactly what made a place feel like home. Standing there, surrounded by the hum of cicadas and the distant laughter of children playing, I realized something important. Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the sweetest victories. And this victory, it was ours.